I've made multiple videos on the Roland MC-101 in the past, so if you're a longtime viewer who has seen all of those videos, most of this will be old news to you. But if you are new to the MC-101 and are wondering if it's right for you and what makes it stand out in 2022, I've got you covered. Let's talk about what makes this thing unique and uniquely powerful. Now, before I get into specific features, I want to draw your attention to the MC-101's price and size. In terms of price, this thing goes new for around $500, and you can usually get it quite a bit cheaper used, which I do recommend you look into. And in terms of its size, you've got my relatively small hands for scale. This thing's tiny. It has a small footprint. It's a little bit thick, but it doesn't take up a whole lot of space. It's relatively light, fits easily in a backpack, and's not going to weigh you down. And it's AA battery powered, so it gives it a bit of extra longevity and, once again, more portability. So the features that this thing has are completely available in lots of other standalone devices as well. But from what I found, none of them are this small, this portable, and this relatively budget. That's the difference. With that being said, let's start off with how this thing deals with sound, because the sound engine is, in my opinion, the thing that really differentiates this from the rest of its budget portable counterparts. So you've got a few different track types to work with. First of all, you've got drum kit tracks that you're just going to load up with samples, and then you've got synth tracks. And these can either have samples loaded into them or patches built with the Roland ZEN-Core sound engine. I'll get back to that in a bit. And there's a third kind of track, the looper track, that can just passively hold a piece of audio and play it over and over. That's literally all it does. I don't find them super useful on this, but they're a little more useful on the MC-101's bigger siblings, the VerseLab MV1 and the MC-707. I'm mostly going to ignore those for the purposes of this video. But let's talk about drum kit tracks first, because you can either use the built-in sounds or sounds that you load in yourself. That's the part that has a much bigger draw for me. I tend to kind of ignore built-in samples in a device, especially when it's as easy as it is on the MC-101 to load them in. All you have to do is pop out the SD card, plug the SD card into your computer, and drag and drop. That's all you have to do. You can even categorize them into folders, and this will just deal with it. And it won't degrade the sound quality once you actually start working with them. It'll leave them in stereo, and you can play them polyphonically. That might not sound like a big deal. Surely that's kind of a bare minimum thing. But when it comes to the world of hardware samplers, it's not. The kind of standard that you're going to see in a lot of places is samples get collapsed down to mono, and you can't play them polyphonically, which means that on something like the Innovation Circuit Rhythm or Electron Digitact, you can only play one sound at a time on any given track. Now, I've been a vocal defender of devices like the Innovation Circuit Rhythm and Electron Digitact. You can get a lot more out of monophonic samplers like them than most people realize. And it doesn't even require that much extra work. You can absolutely make them sound fantastic. But I would absolutely love to see what Roland has managed to do here become the industry standard. A portable device that can just deal with samples and turn them into instruments. So I've got this bass patch here. Well, I say bass patch. It's a bass patch that I then sampled. This is from my $5 sample pack, link in the description. And I've loaded it in to a tone track. That's pretty much the sample exactly as it exists on my hard drive. And polyphony. So nice to have. And once again, that's just not something you see on most devices this portable and this budget. Basically, the next thing up where you're going to be able to get something like that is the MPC-1, and that usually runs you at least another $100 or so if you're getting it used, and is quite a bit of a chunkier, bigger footprint device, much less portable. And the MPC-1 is not battery powered. I hate that this is unique, and that Roland is the only one who seems to be trying to push this, but I'm glad that they did. And your sound shaping possibilities don't stop there. Yes, you have to do a little bit of menu diving, and yes, you get used to it really quickly if you learn where the buttons are. So I've just changed this patch to mono. It is a bass patch after all. And I'm going to set my portamento to on, dial in the time a little bit, and now it's behaving a lot more like a synth. And you can also add stuff like vibrato or control the cutoff, for instance. I really wish that Roland would give us actual filter envelopes. Maybe in a future update, that'd be super nice. But regardless, I'll take this. So now, this will be able to just slot into my mix, and this feels much closer to using a proper sampling plugin, for instance, than using something that's a little bit hamstrung by technical or price limitations. Once again, it should be the industry standard, but as it is, it's fairly unique for something that's this portable and this budget. Both turning samples into synths, playing them multiple notes at a time, and having kit tracks where you can just load all of these up with sounds. And you can modify these on an individual pad by pad basis as well, either selecting your sound. Once again, just easily dive into your custom sample collection that you've just easily dragged into your SD card. You can just switch all of these out pretty quickly. And then you can even mix between these pads on the device itself. So things like level, pan, pitch, a whole bunch of other stuff, a little bit of some basic EQ options, all that kind of stuff. There's another super powerful application for these drum tracks, but I'm going to get back to that in a little bit with the resampling portion of this video. And if that sounds intimidating to you, I'm going to demonstrate it, and hopefully it'll make it make a little more sense. But I've focused on samples because that's a surprisingly big deal. I've not even gotten into the synth engine yet. The Roland ZEN-Core synth engine is one that I personally really like. It sounds really clean, but also seeks to emulate some kind of classic sounds, and you get an absolute ton of presets built in. And you can get some more on their admittedly pretty janky web thing. And I will warn you, the plugin that you use to design sounds from scratch or modify them super in depth does cost money. That's a bummer. But if you do pay that, you get access to what is a really good synth plugin that you can just use in your DAW, and a really powerful synth editor that, in my opinion, sounds pretty damn good. And I should mention that you're not restricted to this chromatic scale either. Like with many other devices, you can do stuff like change your scale. Always nice to have. And then you've got 2 octaves to work with. I should mention that these pads are fairly small, not really all that finger drummable. You see it's missing a few notes. They're not as sensitive as I'd like. But that's fine. You know, for something portable, I guess it's okay. I'll let that one slide, and they are not velocity sensitive. But once again, for something portable, I'll let that slide. I can dial that stuff in manually if I really want to. And, you know, if you're making more electronic-y stuff, that's probably not the worst emission in the world. With that being said, here are a couple of examples of what the sound engine on this thing is capable of. The one thing where the sound engine lacks is sample chopping. There's technically a way to do some sample chopping on this thing. It's a giant pain, and I basically never use it. Although I did do a video on how to do that, so if you're interested in following that up, I'll link it at the end of this video. But regardless, let's get into something that makes this thing stand out even more from its portable counterparts, and that is resampling to create infinite tracks. Let me show you what I mean. So I've got this fairly simple little dance beat. And that is your drums, just a kick, this bass layer, and this other bass layer. So 2 basses layered on top of each other to make one part. You'll notice this track is turned all the way down. That's because I'm using the looper tracks for, in my opinion, their most useful application. You can resample stuff on the MC-101, which means that you can have the MC-101 record itself. These tracks right here are your 2 synth tracks. I'm turning them all the way down, and I'm going to turn up this 4th track, this looper track. So I recorded these 2 tracks back into the MC-101, which is pretty easy to do. It retains full sound quality. It doesn't collapse it down to mono in terms of the stereo spectrum. It doesn't compress it at all. It's a WAV file. And you've been able to do that for a while, and that's already super nice to have. But now I can directly export that WAV file that resampling process has just generated. Turn this down, and I can load it into a drum track. So now, And I can do that as many times as I want in one project. So now what I could do is I could switch these sounds out on these two synth tracks entirely. You can do that on a clip-by-clip basis, by the way. So you've got Ableton-style clips or patterns that you can control the length of, and you can control stuff like having different sounds living in different clips. So I could maybe make another bass layer. I could have a different part entirely going on, and then I could resample that and load it into here as well. And I can just keep doing that until I filled up my drum tracks and still have my synth tracks free. So if you're trying to build up a bit more of a live jam and want more layers than 4 to work with, this is how you're going to do it. It might seem like a complicated workaround, and to a degree, yeah, I'll admit that it is. But it's very cool, and I like that Roland just went for it. And in fact, let me show you an even more intense version of this. So in this duplicate project, I've actually done exactly what I was describing. So I've got that bass patch on here, just going. I've got a few more drums going here. And I've got these two separate tracks. Another bass patch, just doing the same part for another nice filling out layer, and a completely different synth part. So now, and of course, you can take this a lot farther with some patience. And remember, this right here, this is a WAV file that now just lives on the SD card. So I can go ahead and just drag that WAV file from the SD card into my DAW if I want to. Or you can record via USB into your DAW with the MC-101, and it will separate out the 4 individual tracks. So you can do a live jam, launch a bunch of different clips or scenes, which I'll get into in a second, and record those individual tracks and then mix them after the fact, which is a great hybrid workflow. It's one I really like. Another thing I'd love to see become industry standard. And in fact, I'm going to do a whole video on stuff I'd love to see become industry standard. So subscribe if you want to see it. But regardless, that's really nice to have. But I mentioned I'd talk about scenes. Real quick, one other note about clips before I get to that, though. Clips can be up to 8 bars long. It's another one of those things that doesn't seem like a big deal, but some self-contained devices max out at 4. Electron. And once you've got a bunch of clips populated through here, you can see I've got a few more on these tracks. You can organize them into scenes, which you can then launch as if they are clips, and they'll just kick in right when they need to. And this is great because this allows you to build up a bit more of an arrangement. And for those of you who think that patterns get you stuck in a loop, the answer to that is scenes. Because you can make a bunch of different patterns that have a bunch of variation and then kind of collect them into scenes that live here, and then you can launch those as your bigger song sections. And per a firmware update, you can also chain these together. It's a bit of a janky process. It's kind of a pain, probably because it was added in a firmware update and all you have is this tiny screen. But it is nice that Roland added it because of popular request. And finally, a couple of random scattered other things that I didn't have a chance to mention yet in this video. Scatter. That's not completely unique at this point. Those of you who know the SP404 or the circuit rhythm will be quite familiar with scatter effects already, but it is nice to have, and you can even route them so that they only affect one track, which makes them a lot more useful in my opinion, and you can affect different parameters of them just right on the device itself. Also, there's a fun little feature that's a bit of a gimmick, but I do enjoy it, called random patches, and it'll literally go to, I think it's a bank of patches, and just pull one at random and then randomize some parameters of it. So you're never going to get the same patch twice, but you might get similar ones. I did a dedicated video demonstrating that I'll link to at the end of this video as well. And I can't not mention the effects. So each track gets an effect that you can add to it, the multi-effects, and you've got a ton of options to choose from, including iconic stuff like the Juno chorus. It even has noise, which thankfully you can turn down. Doesn't sound great on drums, but hopefully you get the idea. And you've got a ton of other stuff in here. Flangers, distortions, phasers, filters, general EQ-based stuff, some compressors, all that kind of stuff is all in here. And That's separate from the send effects. So you have delay and reverb sends that you can send the tracks to as well. So even though you can't really do sound design straight from scratch on the MC-101, you do have quite a few options to shape your sound, which is really nice. And the workflow is definitely clunkier than something like an Ovation circuit. I've harped on that in previous videos, but once you get used to the button press combinations, which are pretty helpfully labeled for the most part, you will be able to just like casually sit on the couch and fly around this thing without really thinking about it. I know that because that's my use case. I bring this traveling and I'll just kind of sit in somewhere and doodle out a little beat, and it does end up feeling pretty effortless once you get used to the workflow. It's not without its problems. For instance, I really don't like that you can't see, when you go into the sequencer, the note layouts and the steps that you've selected at the same time. You have to just dial them in via these knobs or do this little back and forth dance to like select a note and then go back to your sequencer and select a different step and select a note. I wish there was a cleaner way to do that, but space limitations probably made that not an option, or at least not an option that they were willing to spend a lot of time on. I get it. I don't love it, but I'm used to it. Usually I end up, if I flub a take, rather than go and edit it, I just delete all the notes and then re-record it. And you can record unquantized, by the way. Not super unique, but nice to have. Anyway, I am getting to the point where I'm rambling. I think I've gone through all the features that I wanted to get through, so I'm going to leave it at that. And that is it for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to see the MC-101 in action, I've got you covered. You can click or tap these videos up over here, and I'll be back with a new video in a little bit. In the meantime, once again, thank you so much for watching.